Random House Audio presents The Bitter Waters of Medicine Creek, a tragic clash between white and Native America, by Richard Kluger, read for you by Alan Sklar. Listen. Once people could see beyond space and watch the eagle fly toward the sun. Power is coming back to you. You've been looking down. Now it's time to look up. The spirit warms the blood and electrifies the heart, like spring coming out of winter, like a boy learning to ride, or a young hawk wavering across the sky. Songs will be heard by those who listen. People are chanting. Something bigger is coming, of dreams promised long ago. A new song is heard. People will find unity, for the Lord nourishes all. He speaks to all people. Jack Isle. Preface. A Fresh Reckoning. A few years back, I was casting about for an appealing subject on which to base a historical novel, a genre in which I had published 3 earlier works. In both my fictional writing and my books on American social history, I had dwelt frequently on the law and its majesty, along with its debasement by malpractice and misapplication. And so it occurred to me that a stirring narrative could be crafted dealing with the adventures of a fictional circuit-riding judge during the frontier days of the Old West, when life brimmed with peril and where the line between virtue and villainy, at times, grew indistinguishable. Hoping to blend literary license with historical authenticity, I needed to discover at the outset whether legal documents have survived from that earlier time, in particular from the territorial era, before states were carved from vast expanses of wilderness, where the law was largely an abstract premise, heeded fitfully and enforced haphazardly, if at all. Research on an earlier book had taught me that Washington, before it was granted statehood in 1889, had been a U.S. territory for 36 years, long enough to have generated a considerable record of rough-and-ready jurisprudence, assuming the authorities had taken the trouble to preserve it. I phoned the state law library at the Temple of Justice, as Washingtonians, with admirable reverence, have named their Supreme Court building in Olympia, the state capital, and spoke with a pleasant and cooperative librarian. "Oh, yes," she said, "we have all the opinions of the court from the territorial period, and they're all available online." And she gave me the web link. I thanked her with anticipatory glee. "You might," my librarian friend added a bit tentatively, "want to have a look at case number 3 in the first volume of the territorial reports." "Because?" I asked. "It was the first capital case in the history of Washington Territory to be appealed to the Supreme Court. That was the direct predecessor of our present state Supreme Court." The year, she said, was 1857. "I see," I said, not quite catching her drift. "And was there something special about the case that I ought to—" "It dealt with a notorious murder conviction," said the librarian, "and the decision was reviewed 2 years ago." "You mean that would be, 147 years later?" "Yes," she said, and explained that a special tribunal had assembled, presided over by the current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Washington, to reconsider the matter. Recalling the law's hoary precept that justice delayed is justice denied, I ventured, "Wasn't that a little late in the game?" She gave a pleasant laugh and urged me to check into the circumstances. And so I have. What follows is not a historical novel, but rather the story surrounding that case. Washington Territory v. Leschi, an Indian, an all but forgotten episode from our nation's past, which occurred in a then remote but breathtakingly beautiful setting in the farthest northwest corner of the country. The very obscurity of these circumstances, I feel, invites cool reflection on the issue at its core, instead of aversion from it as a too familiar and depressing eyesore on our shared cultural landscape. Call it a fresh reckoning. I logged onto the site and read the court's 1857 ruling. Its first few sentences betrayed a transparently racist tone, suggesting that something less than a disinterested quality of justice was about to be rendered. Events over the 3 years preceding the court's decision, my subsequent investigation led me to conclude, were shaped by a similarly phobic disposition among Washington Territory's citizenry at large. Why this should have been so is a question, I believe, worthy of consideration, even at this seemingly late date. For we are still a young nation, and despite all our feats, our united prospects are likely to turn on our ability to learn from how we have erred, as well as succeeded. White Americans cannot deny their long history of abusive transactions with people of color. These offenses, it should be noted out of fairness, can be explained in part by the fact that no other sizable national state has ever been formed from the confluence of so many diverse ethnic streams. All our heterogeneous ferment no doubt made contentiousness inevitable. In retrospect, it is hardly surprising that whites would assert privileges of entitlement flowing from their fortunate economic status and social rank, also known as the accident of birth, and assign non-white minorities the status of a permanent servile class. And in accord with the precepts of social Darwinism, this uncivil subjugation was facilely intellectualized as neither commendable nor reprehensible. It was merely human nature in the raw. Everywhere and always, the strong have dominated the weak, as with every species in the jungle, and individuals within every social subset. No one said what emerged from the melting pot had to look, smell, or taste very good. A moral problem, however, intruded on this ready excuse for our racial perversion. The American colonies and the nation heir to them were conceived as a white enterprise, even if not certified as exclusively so. Yet on declaring its independence and designing its mechanics of governance, the United States proclaimed the equality of all mankind and sought to deploy political power in ways intended to check the tyranny of the mighty over the needy. A noble aspiration, at sharp divergence from the habits of every previous society. Sadly, high-minded rhetoric was overmatched by self-interest, and the sustained impulse to mastery by the ruling whites. Lately, many, perhaps even most, white Americans, mindful of this thick catalog of incivility, have been afflicted by an epidemic of something closely resembling a national guilty conscience over their past mistreatment of people of color. A cynic might dismiss this belated acknowledgement as timely in view of the swiftly rising proportion of non-whites among the U.S. population and the corresponding surge in their social and economic power. The 2008 election of the country's first African-American president, an attainment unthinkable to the many who could remember when Jim Crow still stalked the land, is of course the most dramatic evidence of this swelling tide of racial tolerance. But it is by no means an isolated incident. Blacks have been advancing as never before in many pursuits, though not yet nearly in ratio to their numbers, and multitudes remain unredeemed. President Obama's first appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court, a Hispanic woman, suggests that the nation has similarly started to recognize and make amends for its long denigration of Latinos, now the largest ethnic minority in the United States. True, the presence of millions of impoverished or struggling illegal migrants from Mexico has aroused resentment across America, and yet there has been no general outcry to round up and deport these aliens. Instead, there is a growing, though far from universal, appreciation that most of these border violators, like most before them, who risked fleeing their homelands for haven here, have come to live free and to earn a decent livelihood, and thus deserve to be dealt with humanely. Asian Americans, too, have been tipping the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?